Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your interest in coming here today to listen to our research project here in our department. As Johnny kindly introduced me, I'm Marwa Dabaieh. I'm from Egypt, and I'm here to conduct my doctoral degree research. Being an architect practicing architectural being an architect practicing architecture, conservation, and environmental design since 2001. I touched upon one of the crucial issues facing vernacular architecture. Simply, vernacular is the local or indigenous type of architecture, or simply it can be mentioned as architecture without architects. In Egypt and in different parts of the world, vernacular architecture is suffering from several problems. So my research basically is concerned with one type of vernacular architecture, which is desert vernacular architecture, and I based my research project in Egypt. And I'm tackling one of the problems, which is the future of this past vernacular heritage. My presentation today will cover 5 main topics. I will give you a kind of an overview about desert vernacular in Egypt, and then I will talk about the vernacular problems currently now. And then I will give you an overview about my research objectives. And then I will talk about the methodology adopted by this research to solve the problems and achieve the research objectives. And then I will conclude my presentation with achieved results so far from my research. So as the research is based in Egypt, so I will take you from Sweden to a little trip to Egypt to see what's happening there in vernacular architecture. Egypt is famous for several types of vernacular architecture, but as I told you, I focused my research on desert vernacular, and I investigated 5 main principal desert oases, and I focused my research in one of them is called Dakhla Oasis to base my research project there. As an overview for desert vernacular architecture, desert vernacular is a kind of a sustainable traditional building heritage where people inherit the traditional way of building from their ancestors. They develop their houses according to their current needs. They use local materials available in the local environment to cope with their current needs and to cope with the harsh desert climate. So these houses, unfortunately, recently don't cope with some of the needs where local inhabitants are demanding or had kind of aspirations or future perspectives about how they want to live. So such vernacular settlements are now suffering from several problems. One of them is that inhabitants, they leave their cities, towns, and villages and live in another type of building house or housing settlements made of newly industrialized materials like concrete or fired bricks or whatever. So those desert settlements are now kind of ghost cities, empty, deserted from inhabitants. So the problem is, it's either those cities are just abandoned and the inhabitants just live in such kind of desert of new concrete block buildings, or they just demolish part of the city or the town and they build their new houses instead within the urban fabric, the traditional urban fabric, or they sweep completely their towns and villages and they build newly built settlements made of concrete, cement, or fired bricks. So what we perceive now in those desert settlements, and we look at them with sympathy and nostalgia, that those are the vernacular heritage that we want to keep. The local residents or dwellers, they perceive it as a kind of old-fashionable way of living, or they look at it as a kind of a shame or poverty that people will look down on us when we still live in those buildings. And some of them, they have a kind of notion that this is a peasant culture if we still live in those mud brick houses, and people might look at us as a kind of we are just staying in the old times. But for them, they have a kind of essential issues, and we need to listen to them because they lack a kind of modern facilities they need in their houses, like proper electricity or water and drainage system. And some of them, they suffer from termites and white ants that eat sometimes their houses, the fibers and the straw inside the mud bricks, so it causes kind of structural cracks, and that makes them feel unsafe to still living in these traditional houses. It's really paradoxical and contradictory issue. We look at the traditional houses as kind of authentic buildings. It resembles our culture and identity. And it's a kind of environmentally friendly housing solutions that cope with the desert harsh environment. And it's really cheap and economical to build. But for them, they need a more fashionable, modern way of living. They need to use new technology. They need to look modern, like people living in big cities. And that's actually the issue of globalization. People look at satellite channels and they see how people live in big cities. And so why not we don't live like them? And this is the situation that desert vernacular is facing now in Egypt. Totally new style of architecture that doesn't cope with the culture or the environment. And such concrete blocks, they can be anywhere except in the desert climate. They don't have any adaptable solutions for the desert climate. Those wide streets and small concrete houses, of course, they are not suitable for way of proper living. We are not only losing the tangible, the building, heritage itself, but we are losing a kind of intangible tacit knowledge in craftsmanship. Those seniors, like the carpenters and blacksmiths and those who make pottery or mud brick, when they die, they will take the whole tacit knowledge inherited from their ancestors with them, because the coming new generations are not willing to keep on inheriting such traditions. So here, from the research problem I mentioned, comes the research objective, that the research is trying to make it feasible for the local inhabitants to use the traditional knowledge, adapt it to their current needs, solving the problems, being able to build with this traditional knowledge in the future and in the present time. So my research is trying to find a kind of a conservation model, how to conserve this traditional vernacular heritage by developing the local building technology to be adapted to be applied in the present and future times, together with participation of the local inhabitants. So to be able to achieve this objective, case study methodology was adopted by the research, and this case study methodology is simply based on two phases, explanatory phase and exploratory phase. The first phase mainly tackle the history and the survey for the architecture and for the urban fabric in those vernacular cities. When they are analyzed, they will be applied in a kind of an action research. I mean that the local inhabitants will be involved in a kind of a demo model to be built together, using their traditional knowledge and solving their current problems that they are facing to be able to be applied in the contemporary time. This action research hopefully will end with this conservation or the application of this conservation model, which is the objective of the research itself. Back again to the map. Now I will show you how this methodology was applied in Dakhla Oasis. I chose the small town called Balat, according to certain criteria, to apply this action research project there. As part of the survey, the architecture and the design characteristics of this town was studied, together with the history of the area and the history of the traditional knowledge. Some of the buildings dated back to the 16th century. Of course, the urban values was studied in the area, the urban fabric and the urban tissue. The environmental and structural values was studied because it contains a kind of passive techniques that people used to apply in their housing techniques using environmental methods, and also the local material itself from the local environment. And of course, it was essential to study the typology and the geometry of the houses and of the whole town as an urban fabric itself. And the aesthetics values also was a kind of concern. Such buildings built by hands, so they had a lot of human and aesthetic values in them. Together with the culture and the tradition, how people used to live, and currently how they are baking bread or plastering their houses, or just practicing the rituals, or doing some of the essential life needs like oil juicing and so on. Sometimes I had to do things by myself to be able to understand how those people used to plaster and build their houses by themselves. And of course, part of the survey was doing these questionnaires and interviews, and especially with seniors, to be able to grasp the know-how knowledge from them. Some techniques were used in the measurement because it was sometimes difficult to measure by hand such houses. So we used laser scanning techniques to measure outdoor and indoor spaces. So here comes the conclusion of my thesis, which is this conservation model. And I will show you how the steps was applied with the local inhabitants there in this little town of Balat. So first, people were contracted to this action research project by word of mouth. So they are asked to contribute and to help in this work process. And actually, they were really enthusiastic to be worked with their traditional knowledge and give their experience in the building technology. And they were consulted for their problems and what are their future needs and future aspirations to be able to solve this problem and to put those future aspirations in focus, how to apply them in this newly housing demand. And then they collaborated in a kind of workshop and participatory seminars and workshops. We made a kind of design workshop for what they can look, or what can be the kind of vision for a new house model. And we worked at colleagues offering different kind of experience. They offer their tacit knowledge, and they offer a kind of technical solutions for their currently problem. And we worked step by step to build this house model, starting from the foundation and casting the mud break. And it was a nice experience because the seniors and young generation, they participated in this project. So we were able to use the tacit knowledge inherited from the seniors to transfer it to the coming generation, who unfortunately sometimes they are not willing to inherit this traditional way of building. So it was for them a kind of new experience to experience by themselves how this traditional way of building could be done. A lot of solutions were introduced to them to solve some problems relative to mud break casting or waterproofing for their houses in case of rain, how to avoid the structural cracks and so on. And both men and women, they participated in this project. And finally, we managed to finish kind of a small house model where we used this tacit knowledge and improving some of the currently faced problems. And at the end, I would like to conclude from this presentation that it's still possible to make use of this traditional vernacular knowledge. And my research is looking at conservation not only as a kind of method to maintain the identity of vernacular settlements, but it's rather a kind of a mechanism which can be applied to deal with these changes in the social and cultural and environmental vernacular issues in vernacular settlements. And finally, it's still possible that vernacular as a past heritage can be used as a catalyst for contemporary and future designs. And that is the last message from this presentation. Thank you so much for your time.